It was an extraordinary scene at the White House today. Chief of Staff John Kelly, whose son was killed in Afghanistan, defended President Trump's handling of a condolence call to the widow of a fallen soldier. The retired general blasted the congresswoman who'd criticized the president, Florida Democrat Frederica Wilson, as an empty barrel, saying it makes the most noise. Kelly said he'd recommended early on that the president not call families of the fallen, but Mr. Trump told him he wanted to call the families of the 4 soldiers killed 2 weeks ago in Niger.
And he said to me, "What do I say?" I said to him, "Sir, there's nothing you can do to lighten the burden on these families. But let me tell you what I tell him." He was doing exactly what he wanted to do when he was killed. He knew what he was getting into by joining that 1%. He knew what the possibilities were because we're at war. And when he died, in the 4 cases we're talking about in Niger, my son's case in Afghanistan, when he died, he was surrounded by the best men on this earth, his friends. That's what the president tried to say to 4 families the other day. I was stunned when I came to work yesterday morning and brokenhearted at what I saw a member of Congress doing. A member of Congress who listened in on a phone call from the President of the United States to a young wife, and in his way tried to express that opinion. He's a brave man, a fallen hero. He knew what he was getting himself into because he enlisted. There's no reason to enlist. He enlisted. And he was where he wanted to be, exactly where he wanted to be, with exactly the people he wanted to be with when his life was taken. That was the message. That was the message that was transmitted.
General Kelly began his defense of the president with a gripping and emotional explanation of what happens when an American service member is killed in action.
Their buddies wrap them up in whatever passes as a shroud, puts them on a helicopter as a routine, and sends them home. Their first stop along the way is when they're packed in ice, typically at the airhead, and then they're flown to usually Europe, where they're then packed in ice again and flown to Dover Air Force Base, where Dover takes care of the remains, embalms them, meticulously dresses them in their uniform with the medals that they've earned, the emblems of their service, and then puts them on another airplane linked up with a casualty officer escort that takes them home. While that's happening, a casualty officer typically goes to the home very early in the morning and waits for the first lights to come on. And then he knocks on the door. Typically the mom and dad will answer, the wife, and the casualty officer proceeds to break the heart of a family member and stays with that family until, well, for a long, long time, even after the internment. So that's what happens. Typically, the only phone calls the family receives are the most important phone calls they can imagine, and that is from their buddies. In my case, hours after my son was killed, his friends were calling us from Afghanistan, telling us what a great guy he was. Those are the only phone calls that really matter. And yeah, the letters count to a degree, but there's not much that really can take the edge off what a family member is going through. So some presidents have elected to call. All presidents, I believe, have elected to send letters. If you elect to call a family like this, it is about the most difficult thing you could imagine. There's no perfect way to make that phone call. It stuns me that a member of Congress would have listened in on that conversation. Absolutely stuns me. And when I listened to this woman and what she was saying and what she was doing on TV, the only thing I could do to collect my thoughts was to go and walk among the finest men and women on this earth. And you can always find them. because they're in Arlington National Cemetery. Went over there for an hour and a half. Walked among the stones, some of whom I put there, because they were doing what I told them to do when they were killed. And I appealed to America that let's not let this maybe last thing that's held sacred in our society. A young man, young woman going out and giving his or her life for our country. Let's try to somehow keep that sacred.
General Kelly confirmed that when his son died, he did not get a call from President Obama. But Kelly said he does not mean that as a criticism of Mr. Obama.